The gleaming research station Helios 7 hung like a jewel against the backdrop of Jupiter's swirling storms. Inside, Dr. Lyra Patel adjusted her microscope for the 1,000th time, squinting at the alien cellular structure that had consumed her attention for the past 3 months. The sample, a living tissue from a previously unknown species, displayed properties that defied conventional biology. Dr. Patel? The soft voice startled her from her concentration. Your presence is requested in the diplomatic chamber. Lyra suppressed a sigh. More bureaucrats interrupting her work. I'll be there shortly, she replied, carefully securing her samples. The diplomatic chamber was already crowded when she arrived. Representatives from various Earth organizations lined one side of the long table, while the other remained conspicuously empty. Director Harrison, a stern-faced man with graying temples, motioned her to take a seat. They're arriving, he whispered, just as the station's AI announced the incoming shuttle. Lyra's heart raced as the chamber's massive doors slid open. She'd read the briefings, of course, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of the Centaurians. Their ambassador, Calden, led the delegation with fluid grace. His silvery skin seemed to ripple with bioluminescent patterns, and his eyes, all 4 of them, gleamed with an intelligence that made Lyra's breath catch. Greetings, representatives of Earth, Calden's voice resonated directly in their minds, a standard feature of their advanced translation technology. We come seeking knowledge and understanding. The formal introductions proceeded according to protocol, but Lyra couldn't take her eyes off Calden. When he turned those penetrating eyes toward her, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Dr. Patel, Director Harrison's voice cut through her thoughts. Perhaps you'd like to share your findings on the cellular samples. Lyra stood, forcing herself to focus on the science. Yes, of course. The samples you provided show remarkable adaptive properties. She launched into her presentation, but as she spoke, she noticed Calden's patterns shifting, creating mesmerizing swirls across his skin. Fascinating, Calden interrupted, moving closer to examine her holographic displays. But you've missed something crucial. His proximity sent waves of warmth through her body, an unexpected reaction to his alien presence. Impossible, Lyra countered, professional pride momentarily overriding her attraction. I've analyzed every aspect. Look here, Calden gestured, his arm brushing against hers. The contact sent an electric jolt through her system, and suddenly the data seemed to shift before her eyes. Patterns she'd missed before emerged with startling clarity. The meeting extended well beyond its scheduled time, evolving into an intense exchange of scientific theories and cultural insights. As other representatives filtered out, Lyra and Calden remained, lost in discussion. Your perspective is unique, Calden observed, his patterns forming what Lyra was beginning to recognize as expressions of interest. Perhaps we could continue this discussion privately. Our ship maintains a research laboratory that might interest you. Warning bells should have rung at such an invitation, but Lyra found herself nodding. I'd like that very much. Hours later, aboard the Centaurian vessel, Lyra discovered that alien biology was far more fascinating than she'd imagined. Calden's laboratory was a marvel of biotechnology, but it was the ambassador himself who commanded her attention. Your species' approach to science is refreshingly direct, Calden commented, demonstrating a particularly advanced piece of equipment. His patterns had shifted to deeper, more intense colors. Yet you seem to hold back in other areas. Lyra felt her cheeks flush. What do you mean? Your physiological responses suggest strong attraction, yet you maintain professional distance. Is this a human cultural requirement? The directness of his observation startled a laugh from her. Not exactly. It's just, complicated. Interspecies relations are uncharted territory. Then perhaps, Calden moved closer, his patterns swirling hypnotically, we should chart it together. For science, of course. As his bioluminescent patterns synchronized with her racing heartbeat, Lyra realized she was about to make first contact in ways no human protocol had ever covered. And she couldn't wait to begin the experiment. Director Harrison would have a fit if he knew, but as Calden's alien touch sent shivers of pleasure through her body, Lyra decided some discoveries were worth the risk. After all, isn't this what scientific exploration was all about? The following weeks aboard Helios 7 transformed into a delicate dance of scientific collaboration and hidden desires. Lyra found herself spending increasingly long hours in the Centaurian research wing, ostensibly studying cellular structures but inevitably drawn into fascinating conversations with Calden. Your human scientists focus so intently on physical properties, Calden observed one evening as they reviewed data together. His bioluminescent patterns shifted to a contemplative azure. Yet you often miss the energetic connections between living things. Lyra leaned closer to the holographic display, trying to ignore the warmth radiating from his silvery skin. Show me what you mean. Calden's 4 eyes sparkled with something akin to mischief. Perhaps a demonstration would be more effective. He reached out, placing his hand near hers without quite touching. Close your eyes. Lyra hesitated only briefly before complying. Immediately, she felt it, a subtle vibration in the air between them, like static electricity but more alive. That's impossible, she whispered, eyes flying open. I shouldn't be able to sense your bioelectric field without special equipment. Impossible? Calden's patterns rippled with amusement. Or simply unexplored? Your species has capabilities you haven't begun to understand. Their research sessions began incorporating more hands-on experiments after that. Calden taught her to recognize and respond to the subtle energetic exchanges between their species, while Lyra introduced him to uniquely human concepts of pleasure and connection. Director Harrison grew increasingly suspicious of their extended laboratory hours. Dr. Patel, he cornered her one morning. The board is expecting a detailed report on your findings. Something more substantial than these vague notes about energetic resonance. The research is proceeding exactly as it should, Lyra replied smoothly, clutching her data pad closer. She'd carefully edited out the more personal aspects of their discoveries. The Centaurians are simply more reserved about sharing certain aspects of their biology. If Harrison noticed the slight flush in her cheeks, he didn't comment. But his narrowed eyes suggested growing concern about her involvement with the aliens. Later that night, in the privacy of the Centaurian laboratory, Lyra shared her worries with Calden. They're getting suspicious. Maybe we should be more careful. Calden's patterns shifted to deep purple, concern, she'd learned to recognize. Perhaps, he agreed, moving closer. Or perhaps it's time to be more open about our research. His hand traced the curve of her shoulder, leaving trails of tingling energy in its wake. After all, we're making groundbreaking discoveries about interspecies compatibility. Is that what we're calling it now? Lyra laughed, then gasped as his bioelectric field synchronized with her nervous system in a now familiar way. Very scientific. Their research had progressed far beyond simple touch experiments. Lyra had discovered that Centaurian bioluminescence could create the most extraordinary sensations when properly attuned to human nerve endings. In return, she'd introduced Calden to the unexpected pleasures of human kiss-induced endorphins. But it wasn't just physical exploration. Each encounter deepened their understanding of each other's cultures, breaking down barriers between their species in ways no official diplomatic mission could achieve. Your people fear what they don't understand, Calden observed, his patterns creating mesmerizing swirls across his skin. Yet you personally seek out the unknown with such passion. Isn't that what exploration is about? Lyra traced the glowing patterns with her fingertips, delighting in how they followed her touch. Pushing boundaries, making new discoveries. Their discussion was interrupted by an urgent message from the station's AI. Dr. Patel, your presence is required in the main laboratory. Anomalies detected in the cellular samples. Reluctantly disentangling herself from Calden's embrace, Lyra straightened her uniform. Duty calls. But this discussion isn't over. It never is, Calden's patterns flickered with affectionate amusement. Humans are remarkably persistent in their pursuits. As Lyra hurried to the main lab, she reflected on how much had changed in just a few weeks. What had started as scientific curiosity had evolved into something far more significant, not just for her and Calden, but potentially for both their species. The cellular samples were indeed showing unexpected changes, but Lyra's mind was already racing ahead to the implications of her personal research with Calden. If humans and Centaurians could connect on such fundamental levels, what other possibilities awaited exploration? She didn't know it yet, but those possibilities would soon be tested in ways neither she nor Calden could have anticipated. The alert came at 0300 station time, jolting Lyra from sleep. Her data pad flashed urgent red, unauthorized access detected in the restricted research sector. Her heart stopped when she saw the source signature, Centaurian. Memories of the previous evening flooded back. Calden's patterns had seemed different, more guarded. He'd asked unusually specific questions about human genetic adaptation capabilities. At the time, she'd been too distracted by his mesmerizing touch to notice. The restricted sector housed Earth's most sensitive biological research, including defense-related projects. Lyra's security clearance barely covered knowing it existed, let alone accessing it. But Calden, what was he doing there? She dressed quickly, mind racing. Protocol demanded she alert station security immediately. Her finger hovered over the emergency contact button, but something held her back. She had to know the truth first. The corridors were eerily quiet as she made her way to the restricted sector. Her access card worked on the first checkpoint, then the second. At the third, she found the security system already disabled, professionally, without triggering any alarms. Calden, she called softly, entering the darkened laboratory. I know you're here. His bioluminescent patterns gave him away, a faint glow behind the main research terminal. When he turned, his 4 eyes held an expression she'd never seen before, regret mixed with determination. You weren't supposed to know, he said quietly, his patterns rippling with complex emotions. Not yet. Know what? Lyra's voice shook slightly. That you're stealing Earth's research data? That everything between us was just intelligence gathering? No. His patterns flared intensely. What we shared was real. But my mission. He gestured to the terminal screen, where complex genetic sequences scrolled past. This is bigger than us. The truth spilled out in rushed, telepathic bursts. The Centaurians weren't just seeking diplomatic relations, they were desperate. A genetic degradation was slowly killing their species. Their scientists had discovered that human DNA contained unique repair mechanisms that might save them, but Earth's governments had refused to share the research. We're dying, Lyra, Calden's patterns dulled to a mournful gray. My people, my family, we have less than a generation left without this knowledge. Lyra's mind reeled. The cellular samples she'd been studying, the questions about genetic adaptation, it all made horrible sense now. Why didn't you tell me? We could have found another way. Would your leaders have agreed? When they already refused our official requests. His patterns shifted to something like bitter amusement. Humans guard their advantages well. Before Lyra could respond, emergency lights flooded the laboratory. Director Harrison's voice crackled over the intercom, security breach detected. All personnel, report to emergency stations. This is not a drill. They know, Calden's patterns pulsed with urgency. Come with me. Please. Your knowledge, your understanding of human genetics, you could help save my people. Lyra stared at him, torn between duty and desire, between her oath as a scientist and her feelings for this alien being who'd shown her wonders beyond imagination. The station's AI began a countdown, security forces deploying in 5 minutes. All unauthorized personnel must surrender immediately. Lyra, Calden reached for her, his touch sending familiar waves of pleasure through her nervous system. Choose quickly. Her mind raced through possibilities. The research data Calden sought could save his species, but it could also be weaponized. Yet withholding medical knowledge that could prevent extinction, wasn't that its own kind of weapon? If I help you, she said carefully, we do this my way. No stealing, no secrets. We find a legitimate way to share this knowledge. Calden's patterns swirled with hope. The High Council would agree to any reasonable terms. But how? The sound of approaching security forces echoed through the corridor. Lyra moved quickly to the terminal, her fingers flying over the controls. First, we give them something they can't ignore. She initiated a data transfer, not of the restricted genetic research, but of her own findings. Months of documented interactions between human and Centaurian biology, proof of unprecedented compatibility between their species. Biological bridges already exist between our peoples, she explained rapidly. We just have to help them see it. Now, tell me everything about this genetic degradation. We have about 3 minutes to save both our careers and your species. As security forces burst into the lab, they found an unusual scene, a human scientist and Centaurian diplomat deep in urgent discussion about genetic markers and cellular regeneration, surrounded by holographic displays of groundbreaking biological research. The next few hours would change everything, not just for Lyra and Calden, but for the future of human-Centaurian relations. Sometimes, Lyra reflected, the greatest discoveries came from the most desperate moments. The emergency council chamber hummed with tension. 3 days had passed since the incident in the restricted lab, and now representatives from both species sat in uneasy conference. Lyra stood before them, trying to keep her voice steady as she presented her findings. The compatibility between our species isn't just coincidence, she explained, gesturing to the holographic displays. It's evidence of ancient genetic engineering, far more advanced than anything we've achieved. The Centaurian degradation isn't a natural occurrence, it's the breakdown of that engineering. Director Harrison leaned forward, his expression skeptical. And you discovered all this during your private research sessions with the alien diplomat? Lyra refused to blush. The intimate nature of our interaction actually proved crucial to the discovery. The bioelectric resonance between our species revealed patterns we wouldn't have found otherwise. Calden stepped forward, his patterns glowing with calm conviction. Dr. Patel speaks truth. Our scientists suspected our ancestors were engineered, but we never knew by whom. The markers in human DNA suggest both our species were created by the same ancient race. The revelation sent shockwaves through the chamber. Whispered conversations broke out among the Earth representatives while the Centaurian delegation's patterns flickered with rapid communications. If what you're saying is true, Harrison said slowly, it changes everything. But it also raises serious security concerns. This knowledge could be dangerous in the wrong hands. More dangerous than letting an entire species die. Lyra challenged. The degradation is accelerating. Without the repair sequences found in human DNA, the Centaurians have less than 20 years left. The debate raged for hours. Earth's representatives feared sharing genetic secrets could lead to biological weapons. The Centaurians argued that withholding the knowledge was an act of genocide. Through it all, Lyra and Calden stood united, their private connection now a bridge between their peoples. Finally, Lyra played her last card. There's something else you need to see. She activated a private data stream, one she'd recorded without Calden's knowledge. It showed the real-time genetic changes in her own cells after prolonged exposure to Centaurian energy fields. The exchange goes both ways, she explained as gasps filled the chamber. Their bioelectric fields are rewriting some of my DNA, making improvements our scientists haven't even imagined. We're not just compatible, we're complementary. We can save each other. The impact was immediate. What had been a diplomatic crisis transformed into a race to understand the implications. Teams of scientists from both species were assembled, with Lyra and Calden at the helm of the joint research initiative. But not everyone was convinced. As they left the chamber, Harrison pulled Lyra aside. "The board is concerned about your objectivity, Dr. Patel. Your relationship with the alien has given us insights we couldn't have gained any other way," she interrupted firmly. "Sometimes the best science happens outside protocol." Later, in the privacy of their new joint laboratory, Calden's patterns swirled with troubled colors. "They still don't trust us completely." "They don't have to," Lyra replied, reaching for him. "They just have to trust the science. And each other." As their energy fields synchronized, she felt the now familiar rush of genetic optimization, their bodies sharing ancient secrets encoded in their very DNA. The work ahead would be challenging. Integrating their biological technologies, understanding the ancient engineering that had created both their species, finding a cure for the degradation, it would take years. But they had started something revolutionary, not just in science but in showing what was possible when barriers broke down. "Your people are remarkably adaptable," Calden observed, his patterns shifting to colors of admiration and something deeper. "When faced with impossible situations, you find ways to transcend them." Lyra smiled, tracing the luminescent patterns on his skin. "That's humanity's real gift. We don't just solve problems, we transform them into opportunities." "And speaking of opportunities," she pulled him closer, their fields harmonizing in ways that sent pleasure cascading through both their nervous systems. "Sometimes the best diplomatic relations happened at the molecular level." And as their research progressed, changing both their species in unexpected ways, Lyra and Calden continued to explore the boundaries of what was possible when two worlds came together. The future they were building would reshape both their civilizations. But in moments like this, tangled together in a dance of biology and emotion, they were simply two beings discovering that love, like life itself, found a way to adapt and evolve. 1 year after the breakthrough on Helios 7, the landscape of human-Centaurian relations had transformed beyond recognition. The joint research facility, now expanded to a massive space station dubbed Genesis, orbited at the midpoint between Earth and Centauri space. Here, Lyra and Calden's groundbreaking work had spawned an entirely new field of xenogenetic medicine. "Remarkable," Lyra murmured, examining the latest test results. "The hybrid therapy is showing a 98% success rate in reversing the degradation." Her own body now carried traces of Centaurian DNA, while Calden's genetic structure had been stabilized with human repair sequences. Calden's patterns rippled with joy as he studied the data. "Thanks to you, the first generation of fully cured Centaurian children will be born next month." His 4 eyes sparkled with emotion. "Our people have a future again." But their discovery had led to far more than just a cure. The ancient genetic engineering they'd uncovered had opened doors to understanding human potential that no one had imagined. Controlled exposure to Centaurian energy fields was awakening dormant abilities in human subjects, enhanced healing, telepathic sensitivity, even rudimentary bioelectric manipulation. "Director Harrison is still nervous about these developments," Lyra noted, watching a group of human researchers practicing energy field synchronization with their Centaurian counterparts. "He thinks we're evolving too fast, changing too much." "Change is the nature of life," Calden replied, his patterns forming complex philosophical symbols. "Your Shakespeare said it best, we know what we are, but know not what we may be." Their personal relationship had evolved as well, becoming something entirely new in human or Centaurian experience. Their genetic codes had partially merged through repeated exposure, creating a unique biological harmony that challenged both species' definition of partnership. The observation deck offered a spectacular view of Earth rising over Jupiter's massive form. Lyra stood at the window, Calden's luminescent presence warm behind her. "Sometimes I wonder what those ancient engineers would think of what we've done with their work," she mused. "Perhaps this was their intention all along," Calden suggested, his patterns forming contemplative swirls. "Creating two species that would eventually find each other, combine their strengths, and unlock the next stage of evolution together." A soft chime interrupted their reflection, another group of human Centaurian couples had arrived for genetic compatibility counseling. Their pioneering relationship had inspired others to explore cross-species bonds, each pair contributing new data to their understanding of their shared biological heritage. Dr. Patel, Ambassador Kalden, the station's AI announced, "The Genesis Council is ready for your presentation on Phase 2 trials." As they made their way to the council chamber, they passed the nursery where the first generation of genetically stabilized embryos developed, some pure Centaurian, others representing the first human Centaurian hybrids from volunteers in their program. Each tiny life represented a future their ancestors couldn't have imagined. "You know," Lyra said, pausing to watch a particularly active embryo pulse with bioluminescent patterns, "when I nearly missed that shuttle on Mars a year ago, I thought it was the worst luck. Turns out it was the universe's way of getting me exactly where I needed to be." Kalden's patterns shifted to the deep, rich colors that indicated love, a word that had gained new meaning through their connection. The best discoveries often come from unexpected detours. In the council chamber, representatives from both species gathered to hear their proposals for expanding the program. The fear and suspicion of the early days had given way to excitement about their shared potential. Earth's governments had finally understood that isolation was no longer an option, humanity's future lay in the stars, and in the connections they forged with other beings. "Today we stand at a new frontier," Lyra began her presentation, feeling Kalden's supportive energy harmonizing with her own. "Not just of space, but of what it means to be alive, to be conscious, to be evolving beings in an infinite universe." As she spoke about their latest findings, Lyra felt the familiar thrill of scientific discovery mixed with something deeper, the joy of barriers breaking down, of boundaries dissolving, of life finding new ways to flourish and grow. The future stretched before them like the star-filled expanse visible through the station's windows, vast, mysterious, and full of possibilities. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, two species becoming something greater than the sum of their parts. In the end, their story was more than just a tale of forbidden love or scientific breakthrough. It was proof that in the great cosmic dance of life, the steps that seemed most daunting often led to the most beautiful choreography. As the presentation concluded and the council chambers erupted in excited discussion, Kalden's patterns formed the symbol they'd created together, a merge of human and Centaurian characters that meant endless evolution through unity. The next chapter of their journey was just beginning, and the universe waited with infinite patience to see what they would become.